Hey everyone, welcome back to our fertility series. I'm Dr. Kaylee McIsaac from AccuBalance Wellness Center. So we are quickly going to look at one chemical that's been really well studied in relation to female reproduction, and one chemical that's been shown to have some pretty significant effects on male reproduction. And then we're going to get into what to do about all of this. So BPA, I mentioned earlier, is a synthetic compound. It's been used since the 1950s in plastics. So you can find BPA in food packaging, industrial materials, dental sealants, and even personal hygiene products. As I said before, everyone is exposed to BPA through skin, inhalation, and the digestive system. High temperatures can cause the release of free BPA. So that's part of the reason we tell people to not heat your food in Rubbermaid plastic containers. You actually will liberate more of the BPA when you heat it. And even if you do avoid things like plastic food containers, epoxy resins that contain BPA are actually even used to line water pipes. And they are used as coatings on the inside of canned foods. And they're also used in making thermal paper, which is what we use to make sales receipts. So it's no surprise when people learn this that basically all of us have BPA in our systems. BPA is structurally similar to DES, or diethylsylbestrol, which, if that name rings a bell, DES was developed as a synthetic estrogen, and it was given to women actually during their pregnancies. I believe it was the 40s to the 70s. It was banned in 1970 though, because what was found to occur was that if women took DES during a pregnancy with a female baby, those female babies have very high risks of infertility, reproductive organ damage, and even some cancers as well. It kind of makes sense, right? DES is a synthetic component. It acts like an estrogen, so it has these endocrine disrupting effects. And while BPA is not as strong of an endocrine disruptor, because it's similar, it has been shown to have those weakly estrogenic, anti-androgenic, and anti-thyroid hormone activities. In humans, BPA has been shown to affect oocyte maturation. So in fact, in a cohort of women who were going through IVF, those who had the highest level of BPA in their urine had the lowest levels of oocyte maturation and peak concentrations of estradiol, meaning they didn't respond very well and didn't have very good egg quality during their IVF. BPA can also affect the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. So that's the hormonal axis that regulates ovulation. This has been shown in rats, not yet in humans, but in rats who are exposed to BPA in utero. They have shown a correlation with irregular cycles when those babies mature. There's been an association with BPA exposure and the development of PCOS. And in fact, in women who have PCOS, studies have found a significant association between BPA and higher androgen concentrations. So the severity of the androgen imbalance in women with PCOS can be affected by BPA levels. And then studies on birth weight with BPA are mixed, but some studies have found that higher levels of BPA in a mother's serum increase the risk of having a male infant with low birth weight. And BPA also affects men. So it's actually really, at this point in the research, not debatable that BPA disrupts spermatogenesis, or the spermation of form. And that's probably because at high concentrations, BPA has that anti-androgenic activity, anti-testosterone activity in men's systems as well. For male reproduction, the study that really sort of jumped out to me was a study done on arsenic levels in men. 101 men with unexplained male infertility versus 101 matched fertile controls. Basically what they did is they looked at these 200 men and divided them into groups based on the levels of arsenic that were found in their system. And the top quartiles, the top 25% who had the highest amount of arsenic in their systems, when compared to the lowest quartile, there was an odds ratio, so their likelihood of having this diagnosis of unexplained male infertility was 36.5. So these men were 36.5 times more likely to be infertile if they had high levels of arsenic in their systems when compared to men with low levels. So that's really significant. That's a huge difference. Arsenic's been shown to inhibit spermatogenesis, hinder testosterone production, increase oxidative stress and inflammation. It's also been shown to be genotoxic, so it actually affects the DNA and activates heat shock proteins, sort of another mechanism of inflammatory damage. Oftentimes when we think about arsenic, if you know anything about arsenic in the food chain, we think of it being present in chicken and rice. Well, actually, where it's probably coming from is water sources. And the water used to produce the chicken and livestock or to grow and then wash the rice, if that water is highly concentrated in arsenic, it tends to accumulate in those two crops in particular. So it is part of the reason why it's important to know where your food comes from, what it's been grown in, what it's been washed in. Make sure that you trust the source where you're getting your food. 35% of the American population exceeds what's considered the threshold of safety. Although we know what that threshold of safety is, I would say that we probably want our levels of arsenic to be 0 in our systems if we could get them there. So it's also not an uncommon chemical to be exposed to. So what are we going to do about this? Step number 1 is we have to stop taking in the toxins, right? There is no point in opening up your detoxification systems and pushing detoxification if you are continuing to expose yourself to new chemicals all the time. So step 1 in this process is stop taking them in. The 2 classes of toxins we want to be cautious of are the persistent ones. Some of them we'll never be able to remove from our system, so we have to be very careful to avoid any sources of these persistent chemicals. Also, the non-persistent chemicals, we seem to be able to get rid of them, but we want to stop them from coming into the system. And remember that toxins are ubiquitous. So they're in diesel fuel, they're in fish, they're in car exhausts, they're in flame retardants. We're basically surrounded by them unless we make really conscious choices, really mindful changes to reduce our exposure. This is just a still shot image. My husband and I just recently watched Dark Waters. I don't know if anyone else has watched that presentation. It's a movie about the lawyer who sort of exposed the Teflon company for dumping these PFOAs, these persistent chemicals into the environment in the town where the plant was, and all of the negative health outcomes that were seen in both livestock and humans for a very long time after this company did this. So this is a really great example. It's a hard movie to watch if you're sensitive, but a really great example of where these persistent chemicals can come from. So what are the primary sources? This is Dr. Pizzorno's best estimate of our chemical exposures in total. So where is everything coming from? This is his best estimate of the breakdown. 60% of the chemicals we're exposed to are coming into our bodies through our food. 15% is in our water, 10% coming from our air, 10% coming from our health and beauty aids, and then 5% coming from our health and yard chemicals. So these are the categories that we're going to go through right now, what to look for, and what practices you can be putting in place in your life to reduce your exposure in each of these 5 areas. But it's good to know that the most significant source for us is our food. So if you do nothing else, be careful where you're getting your food. Make sure you're choosing organic and following the rules that I'm going to touch on in a minute, because that's the bulk of the chemical exposure in our systems. Some general rules before we get into those 5 categories are, number 1, make it a household rule that there are no new products allowed in your home unless they're clear of chemicals. This is a good rule to follow. It's not always easy to follow, but the more and more you do this, the more you get used to it. So for example, if you run out of glass cleaner, it's very easy to just like automatically go to the grocery store and pick up that same glass cleaner that you always use. Try to be mindful and take a minute to read the ingredients before you even bring it into your home, because that's the best point in time that you can make an alternate decision and not waste your money on a product that's full of toxins. It's smart to progressively replace everything in your home with safer alternatives. I'm going to give you some examples of where you can look products up for their chemical content. It's, if you're at home right now and you have lots of time on your hands, smart idea to start going through your cleaning products and your makeup and your health and beauty to see which products are not the best, which ones you really want to get rid of. And then as you use them up, gradually replace them with something safer. And then try to remember to be as vigilant as you possibly can on all sources of persistent toxins. Those are things like the pesticides and the herbicides that we talked about earlier, and the Teflon that can last in our systems for years on end and potentially for the rest of our lives.